everybody. Welcome to ABA Inside Track, the podcast that's like reading in your car, but safer. I'm your host, Robert Perry Cruz, and with me as always is, unfortunately, only one of my fabulous co-hosts, but it's one of my favorites.
One of your two favorites. It's me, Rob Diana.
Unfortunately, Jackie was unable to attend this recording. This is actually going to be a distance interview with Dr. Francesca degli Espinosa, who is in the UK right now, but has a history of working with families in Italy and has been working with families in Italy to provide services for children with autism. But before we get into the episode, just want to let new listeners or folks who might be tuning in for the first time during our current pandemic know that ABA Inside Track is a behavior analytic podcast where every week we talk about a subject related to behavior analysis and then read some research or review some research. Sometimes we are fortunate enough to have an expert in the field, which is what we have this week with Dr. Espinosa. So we'll be going to that interview in a few minutes. So right now, if you're listening to this as it comes out, which is, I believe, Friday, March 27th, I believe, then you will know that we're in the midst of kind of a global pandemic right now, which is affecting everyone in lots of different ways. But one of the ways that we are seeing real problems are for families who are receiving ABA in-home services. So families of children with autism who have severe special needs and who have been receiving up to now ABA, maybe in-home therapy or regular consultation from a BCBA, with so many places on the planet going into lockdown in which individuals who are not deemed essential cannot leave their homes, or who, even if they are deemed essential, might not make the most sense health-wise to enter someone else's house. That's really putting a brake on a lot of very important services and leaving families in need. As Dr. Espinosa will talk about, that's leaving families who are used to having places to go, have individuals to support them and their children's needs, suddenly are not available, which is different than anything I think we've seen in, forever, I guess. And one of the challenges that we now face is, how are we supposed to provide in-home services when you can't get in a home? So Dr. Espinosa, working in Italy, where this pandemic has really been, very, very severe, much more acute than in a lot of other places around the world, has had a chance to think about this problem. And since there's nothing in the literature, doing the best she can, taking what she knows from her years of experience, from what literature there is that's even closely resembling this problem, and coming up with solutions, which is that's what we do. It's what behavior analysts do. So we are going to move to that interview in just a moment. But if you would like to hear more about this topic, there are two articles that we do not discuss directly, but are sort of tangentially referenced, or we think are related to what Dr. Espinosa talks about in terms of her ongoing efforts to continue to provide services to folks who are in lockdown in Italy. So, Diana, could you tell us what articles should people look up, or we'll have links to on the page?
Sure. So one of the most important components that Dr. Espinosa reviewed in the programs that she set up for families to run in-home was establishing a closed economy that was operated through tokens to allow access to the children's most preferred items. And she'll review all about how that is. But we thought that the token economy research might be a good place to look, and she recommended going way back. So the first article that I have for you to review is Kasdan, 1982, published in the Journal of Applied Behavior Analysis, and that's the token economy a decade later. So this is a follow-up to his 1972 paper. And then more recently, you could certainly review the lengthy, thorough, and elegantly written article by Tim Hackenberg, which is published in JABA 2018, titled Token Reinforcement, Translational Research and Application.
This is definitely a great example of a token economy application. I think one of the better ones I've read in quite a long, long time. So, without any further ado, here is our interview with Dr. Espinosa. So we are very fortunate taking time out of her very busy schedule to be talking with Francesca degli Espinosa, all the way from, you're in the UK right now, you said, right?
Yep.
And we're going to be talking about how efforts to use telehealth to provide services during the current pandemic have been going and what steps have been taken. So if you're listening to this when this comes out, this is all very, real and happening. If you're listening to this a year from now, hopefully it's an interesting, historical curiosity of wow, remember that time we were all stuck at home for months and months? Oh boy, let's hope that's what's going on. So Francesca, how are things going overall? I mean, improvements,
right.
Kind of same as they are?
A bit of a sort of live in it sort of twice, really, because I am Italian and half of my time is spent in my country, my home country, and half of my time is spent in my adopted country, which is the UK. That was before all this happened. So the last time I was in Rome, in Italy, was the 8th of February. After that, I had a few workshops and consultations with my families and my supervisees planned for the end of February, and obviously all hell broke loose around that time. So I haven't been back to Rome since then. Throughout, sort of some schools started shutting in the north of Italy, which the north of Italy became very much the epicenter for the Italian originally epidemic. And many of the families I work with live there. So in pretty much, I think in the 20th of February, schools shut over there. Then that area went into lockdown. It gradually extended to more cities around it until the whole country went into lockdown just over 2 weeks ago. So some of the families I work with have been in lockdown for over 3 weeks. My southern families for 2 weeks, maybe a few days, here and there. And we've sort of been trying to make it up as we go along, but it's been very challenging. Here in the UK, the situation hasn't been so bad until today. Today is our first day of lockdown. Mm-hmm. So that's the current state of affairs between my two countries.
Oh. What is lockdown looking like for Italy, looking like for the UK? Because I know we're just starting today at noon here in Massachusetts. They're doing I don't remember what it's called, the shelter in place. But, the list of essential people who can go to work is still pretty long. If you needed to go to the grocery store, you could. Is it similar to the lockdown there, or is it more?
Slightly differently. Sort of in Italy, the sort of restriction began in the north and then gradually extended to the south, and then the restrictions were increased again over a matter of a few days in terms of their severity. So currently, I just spoke to some of my colleagues this morning. They are at home pretty much all the time. They've closed all the parks. There's no possibility of going out to exercise. You have to have a written self-document declaring why you're going out. So it would be either because you're a key worker and you need to go to work, or you need to go to the supermarket or access sort of health facilities. Mm-hmm. They have now closed pretty much all of the sort of communal gardens, were sort of, condominiums, mm-hmm. because what happened is children would gather there to play. So everybody is indoors. There have been some restrictions lifted for families of children with autism or other disabilities in terms of being able to go out for a short walk, mm-hmm. and then coming back. But that's not across the whole of the country. There seem to be some slight differences across the various cities, but generally it's stay at home the whole time. There is policing the streets, the parks. In the north, the army is now present to obviously help, unfortunately, with the shifting of the bodies. The sort of rate of death seems to have slightly decreased, but the system is overwhelmed. The intensive care system is clearly overwhelmed. So we're not at that stage in the UK, but given the exponential growth of the virus, it is not unrealistic to expect that it will also happen here. Italy also has more beds, more intense acute beds per 1,000 population than the UK. So the UK has come in with restrictions, actually, I think, slightly earlier than Italy did, and they extended them to the whole country straight away. So in the UK at the moment, we're able to go out once a day for exercise. I'm very lucky in that my garden borders with the city park. So I went for a nice long 5-mile run this morning at 6, and I never felt so motivated to go for a run that early in the morning. Just the, anticipation of possibly being deprived of this makes it so much more valuable now. Mm-hmm. And we can go out only to buy essentials. All the shops are shut. The main issue we're having here in the UK is lack of food. I've been able to get quite a lot of things online. Also, with my family being in Italy, my sister 3 weeks ago said, make sure that you order this. I didn't think much of it, but now I think, gosh, maybe I should have listened to her and started panic buying. Not necessarily toilet paper, because being Italian, I had a bidet installed in my house. So I'm not panicking about that. But there's no pasta, no rice, no dry goods that we can buy, no canned tomatoes, tuna, just none of the dry goods. Today was tough to find fruit and veg. Delivery services are overwhelmed. You can't even register to have home deliveries. I've had quite a few families emailing me, children with extreme, who are very restricted eaters, and they just can't find the food that their child generally eats. So it's tough at the moment. I hope that it will improve as people realize that there is food and you don't need to sort of buy too much. They've started rationing, so most supermarkets restrict to 2 items per person, but we're still struggling to find stuff.
That's awful. So in terms of the way, on a typical, normal times, the educational services that you provide, you're mostly doing in-home consultation. Are you also doing center-based as well? Okay, so it's in-home consultation. So could you describe sort of what education would look like non-epidemic situation for most of your clients?
So I'll talk mainly about Italy, because I think that's probably the country that of most interest at the moment, given that it's really the most effective country currently, since China's sort of curve seems to have sort of flattened out. So in Italy, ABA is not formally recognized. There is no state funding for it. Although the other thing I should say is that Italy, as many other countries, have a national health system, and that also includes services for people with disabilities. We do not have specialist schools. We only have mainstream schools. So children are enrolled. There are some exceptions, like hospitals may have their own specialist schools, but in general, mandatory education is mainstream in Italy, and children will get assigned at what we call an LSA, learning support assistant, or an educator to facilitate their education in mainstream. So where does ABA sit in this system? It's not part of the sort of statutory education, but in the last sort of 20 years, it's grown both in popularity amongst service users as well as in acceptance by institutions. So BCBAs have become, over the years, more widely recognized as professionals who can really add value to the education of children with developmental disabilities, and also add value to the training of teachers. We have, in 2011, the government published the National Educational Health Guidelines for the treatment of children and adolescents with autism, from which a clear recommendation for ABA emerges. So this was a sort of breakthrough for us. And, we went from one BCBA in 2007 to well over 200 today. We have 14 verified course sequences, several master's programs at university level. So it's really grown, but it's still not automatically provided by the state unless there is some kind of legal obligation. So the families have taken the state to court, or the regional the regional health provider to court, and they have won. And currently my understanding is that families win almost 100% of the time. So they then services are then funded. Many of my students are health professionals and who are now BCBAs, so they already worked in the system, and they can then now sort of provide these kinds of services as part of their day-to-day job. So it's really grown, and we were doing really well.
Okay, so I guess that gets to the main topic of today is, given that there's been all this growth, however, you can't do business as usual, what accommodations have had to be made for your BCBAs? How have you been able to continue providing some amount of service? And what was sort of the process of developing that? I think that's going to be a question that is already being asked here in America. And I don't know if there's, any one particular answer, but hearing what people are doing that has been successful, even the stuff that's not that successful, I think will give everyone more information about how to proceed for who knows how many more weeks.
So if we start from the premise that services in Italy are generally privately funded, mm-hmm. Some funding may come from the state or through a check that families get because their child has a disability, which they then sort of use to hire tutors, pay tutors and consultants to provide services. So most of what we do happens in the home. We work with families and tutors. They generally have a team of tutors, or in school. So we visit children in schools and work with their LSA. So children have been at home every day without, for the most part, well, now no child is receiving home sessions. And some of them have not been receiving them since the first shutdown into North. So originally, we all thought it was going to be maybe not for very long. So we sort of I didn't put a lot in place for my families. And then after a few days, I realized, hold on a minute, if this goes on for longer than what we hope, as in maybe 2 weeks, mm-hmm. I have had a child and then multiple children at home in a confined environment with the same people having to interact. And so parents who, in an environment in which there's generally a history of free access to reinforcement. Mm-hmm. So if we think about sort of stimulus control and how, that context generally is associated with greater access to free reinforcement than schooling. So they're in this environment with all these stimuli really evoking sort of free access, signaling the reinforcement is freely available. Parents who can't really go and get more reinforcers after satiation sets in. One example is Amazon has stopped making deliveries for non-essentials. So if your child goes through all of the reinforcers, then where are you going to get other ones? You can't take them out. And I started panicking because I thought, I have never had this. And if you look at the research on parent training, on telehealth, on functional behavioral assessment, on behavioral skills training, on MCR, there is no research in which you're given a protocol that needs to last 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for X amount of weeks. So even if we look at NCR research, it's for sessions of limited time. Now, what happens if we run NCR for 14 hours of the waking day 1, day 2, day 3, and you have no chance of having the child access novel reinforcers when satiation sets in? And it's going to get to the point, where the reinforcers have been thoroughly consumed, and I'm going to have challenging behavior because the child doesn't even know what he wants something clearly, but it's because, to speak in sort of layman terms, but it's not because he's being deprived of something. It's because he's gone through everything and there isn't anything else available that we can find, because we've never been in this situation, because we've always been able to have some deprivation, at least at school. Mm-hmm. So then the child can have free access at home, and we don't get into too much of a contrast. And I thought, I'm going to have in 3 days, I'm going to have a real situation where my children, it's not even about loss of skills. I really didn't care about that. It was about ensuring that I didn't create novel, challenging behavior. And that I maintain sanity in the household, because these parents are not just stressed from having to interact with their children or young adults all the time, but they have many more additional stresses. Maybe they have relatives in the hospital. It was just unprecedented. And, I have 3 weeks now of experience of this, and it's a challenge every day. And I thought this is the biggest thing I've ever had to face as a clinician, as an academic, as a professional, and as a human being. And so I started thinking, well, what do I do? I had kids on, some of them were on fairly complex behavioral plans, fairly complex reinforcement schedules. Some we were running Hanley's protocol. Some really needed a lot of natural environment training, needed to maintain a high level of man training. And I thought, there's no way that I can ask parents to provide that. Mm-hmm. There's just no way. I need to think of a system that is very simple for them to maintain all the child's waking hours, very real, that doesn't require manipulation of motivation, having to arrange the environment to create EOs so that the child would mand or teaching new skills. I wish I had the skills to be able to teach parents that, but I didn't think it was realistic. Mm-hmm. I mean, if you have if you think of, if you have a small child, I don't know if you do, but, 1.5, 2-year-old who demands who's very needy and demands your attention all the time, you get some relief, if they go to preschool or, you have grandparents, or sometimes, when, the weekend daddy comes and you say, well, you have him for a bit. So to me, it was a bit like that. It's like these families have like a 1.5-year-old all the time. And on top of that, there were the siblings. And sometimes I had a single parent with 2 children with autism in this situation. Something I need to be able to come up with a system. And so luckily, because we have always worked in the homes, most of our parents were very familiar with what we did. So I was never none of my families were in a situation where the child went to the center, received intervention, came home, they didn't know what the child did, because we always have worked in the home. But I had to think of a system that was very simple for them, that didn't involve the child having free access to all reinforcers. And again, this is all hypothetical, because, I can only use the principles to guide, because there is no protocol for this. Mm-hmm. So I thought the only thing I could think of was closing the economy. Mm-hmm. And creating a system where the household became a complete closed economy, so that access to reinforcement could only occur contingent on certain behaviors. And so I sold that to the families, and I said, look, you're going to be with your kid, whether you want it or not, all the time. And, you can give him the iPad all the time, and that will keep him relatively busy for a day. But he's never had the iPad for that long. Maybe, how about 2 days? He's never had it for that. What's going to happen on day 3 when, he's now had it for 2 full days, and the iPad no longer keeps him engaged, and you have nothing else.
Right. Because we always say, well, what's the motivation? How can we change it? Let's introduce new reinforcers. And suddenly breaking that system down to where there are no additional reinforcers that can be added into the environment just changes the whole paradigm.
Yep. And you can't take them out.
Right.
You can't let them out for a run. So I thought, well, I'm going to teach parents to close the economy. And so they all kind of bought into it, because by then it was, day 5 for some, day 10 for others, and yes. So we asked parents to do a few things, and, not all my families are at the same stage in this process. Some have been able to keep some sessions going with their tutors, but now that the restrictions have increased, now they're all at home. So we've had a few weeks to sort of test it out. So a few things. I made parents go around every single room and identify things their child liked, they thought liked, they had seen their child be interested in at some point. And those had to be things in the house. So it could be, he likes sitting upside down on the sofa. He likes rolling in the blanket. And these may not have been reinforcers that we would have used in the session, but things that the parent had observed their child do. You know, the kind of foods that they liked. Luckily in Italy, there's no food restrictions. So it's easy to get food, other than that people have to wait in a queue and maintain, social distancing. So put all the food away, locked away. So they went around every room of the house identifying potential reinforcers. And then they locked them all away. And some kids had lots, some kids had very few, as we know, but none of these were available anymore for free. Mm-hmm. They were only available based on an exchange criterion. So all the parents were familiar with the token economy, and most of the kids were already on a token economy system. Mm-hmm. We just extended it from the time they woke up in the morning to the time they went to bed at night. Mm-hmm. So instead of it being just restricted to session times, for example, it was the only way children could get access to reinforcement. So to be very practical, parents, some kids had their own tokens attached to token board, attached to them. Some, most cases it was the parent who had it attached to them. And I should say that really the system changed according to the profile of the children. So there were three main profiles that we identified. So my students now, who are all BCBAs, I call them my students, but they're all fully fledged psychologists and professionals. We looked at the preschool children, so children who needed a lot of engagement, a lot of natural environment training, man training, not necessarily early learners, some were, but just young children who require a lot of motor activity. Then we had another group who was the verbally able children, 5 and up, who could sustain a verbal interaction online because their verbal skills were sufficient. They had good question discrimination. So this was another group. And then there was the third group, which was the majority of the kids that we had, who were neither very early learners needing a lot of engagement, they were school age, but didn't have those verbal skills to sustain an online session with a tutor. So the parent in that case was, had to be the support the whole time. So these were the children who we placed mainly on a closed economy system. Mm-hmm. We fixed the exchange production, and we kept the production schedule fairly variable in that initially was FR1 because we needed to teach the parent to give the instruction and reinforce. But over time, parents just learned to give more instructions, but they also learned, and it was an interesting process of mutual shaping, how much to push mm-hmm. and when to stop. That's kind of what happened. So we then divided. So the first thing was, closing the economy by getting rid of all free access to reinforcement. The other thing is we asked parents to identify objectives, 1 week, 3 weeks, and 3 months, I think it was. It was like 1 week, 1 month, and 3 months. So very short term, a little bit longer, and what they viewed as very long term. So 3 months was very long term. And it's interesting, your perception of time changes completely in this situation. So even 1 week was like, oh my God, 1 week. Yes. So they had to identify objectives that were important to them. So behaviors that were contextually appropriate and that could be useful if their child had them to make their life easier around the house. Mm. And the other thing that we got them to do was to list all of the chores that needed to be done around the house that they all did as a family. It didn't matter. Sometimes I had parents say, but he can't do that. He doesn't know how to set up the table. He doesn't know how to hang up clothes. And I said, it doesn't matter. I just need to have a list of all the chores that you guys do. Because then it became easier for us to extract the potential objectives around the sort of natural environment. And so it would be things like cleaning the windows and folding socks, or, and sometimes say, okay, well, just go about your day normally and just note down everything you do. Or again, it would be go into a room and tell me all of the things that you think at any one point may need doing in this room. And just getting them to tact all of these behaviors operationally. So that was the other essential ingredient, because now I had things the parent was motivated for their child to learn, and activities that naturally occurred throughout the day that didn't require the arrangement of new materials, organizing a play activity. It was things that were already there. Because again, on one side, we had to reduce the risk of challenging behavior and satiation. But on the other hand, I had to make sure that what we did was sustainable by the parents and didn't cause more stress, in which case then I would get a lot of escape behavior from the parent, which would then turn into giving the child free access. And then my whole closed economy system would fall apart.
Right.
So, and again, we did this, we made this up as we went along. I mean, we relied on the principles, but, there was really no protocol other than some very old studies on token economies and closed economies in sort of institutions, and good review by Tim Hackenberg in JABA explains some of those principles really well.
Sorry to interrupt the interview in the middle of all this, amazing information, but one of the other positives of getting this episode out so fast and on a topic that I think is on the forefront of everyone's mind is that, in case you did not know, ABA Inside Track is ACE approved. So by listening to our podcast, you are able to apply for 1 learning credit. Now, typically there's a small fee associated with this, but given how many conferences are shutting down, how challenging it's going to be for at least the next few weeks, few months for individuals to get out and get easy access to professional development, we are offering that CE free of any charge. You do still need to listen to the episode and get 2 secret code words that we put in the episode, but then you can go right to the webpage and click on abainsidetrack.com/get-CEUs to apply. We also have a page where we have a few free CEUs that are also for offer. You have to listen to our episodes, of course, but you can then apply for a continuing education credit, a learning credit, for no additional charge. So our first code word that you're going to need to demonstrate that you listened to the episode is squirrel. 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 It's getting to be springtime in some parts of the world, so you might see a few squirrels running around, probably from, inside your house, outside your window. Squirrel. All right, let's go back to that interview. Francesca, can I just quickly ask, was this a situation where you felt you were pause, go to research, or more you were just like, I'm pulling this from my memory and I'll find the evidence. If I get stuck, I'll go back then, kind of?
So I had a bit of time with the first lockdown, the northern families, and that was we knew it was coming. And so I looked at the telehealth, the parent training, the BSD, remotes, and I thought, my parents would look at me and say, I need to engage him all the time. Yes, I can run an hour of natural environment training, an hour of man training. What do I do the other 13 hours? Yeah.
Right.
Oh, so yeah. All these focused interventions, which, we have, research on in terms of getting parents engaged, are brief, focused, they don't last all day. So there wasn't very much that I could sort of pull out. And my parents were saying something very different. They were saying, I need something simple. I need something easy. I can't take data. Don't expect me to do that. I don't care if my child doesn't do table work. I need to know that I'm not making this worse. Mm-hmm. And I have time, but it was just a really difficult situation for them. Mm-hmm. So that's what they asked, something simple. They wanted to be engaged. They didn't want to just have their child do nothing or have free access. But it couldn't be too cumbersome. It couldn't be more effortful than the situation already was. Mm-hmm. So I was aware of the research. So I used the principles, but it's been very much old-fashioned inductive behavior analysis. When you don't have a protocol, use a formative process, use your principles, look at what's happening in the environment. And that's what we did. So those were the things that we did: identify objectives, chores, and the other thing was identifying low risk and high risk times throughout the day. So low risk times were all those situations linked to basic needs. Not so much washing and getting dressed, because they're not necessarily basic needs, but meal times and going out up to the point that it was possible. That became a very, very basic need. Became very, very important. So we structured those times, and we structured the day pretty much to the minute. So wake up, wash, get dressed, then have breakfast. Then it would be dead time. That was a high risk. So any time that wasn't linked to a basic need was a dead time, and hence a high risk time. And then once we identified those, so it would be wash, get dressed, breakfast, dead time, morning snack, outside time, dead time again, lunchtime, dead time again, afternoon walk or time outside, dead time, evening meal. And then the time in between the evening meal and bedtime was also a dead time. So our dead times were high risk times. And so we had to deal with those. So the way sort of we structured it was that the identified objectives occurred during routines. So you get washed, you get dressed, you earn your tokens for doing that and following my instructions. If children didn't need that system, then it was very much a sort of low probability activity linked to a high probability activity. So they would earn their tokens, set the table for breakfast. So they always participated fully in any chore that was then linked to the consumption of a basic need. In this case, it was food. And then, putting things away. And then our dead time started. By that point, the child would have finished their token economy. We pretty much fixed the exchange production at 10 tokens. Easy. It was just easy for the parents. Then that bought the parents a little bit of free time. And the child could then pick any of the reinforcers for however long the parent needed to be free for, but never more than half an hour. So if the parent needed extra time after half an hour, they had to interrupt the child, run another token board, and then the child could then have the reinforcers again. At that point, children who were working on man training, so children who sort of didn't naturally ask for things or spontaneously, that's when the parent would do a little bit of man training. Some children, we had visual menus. Some continued to use their PECs or Prologue or iPad. The signers were a little bit more difficult because the parents didn't necessarily know how to train signs and they weren't efficient signers. So we did go back to using visual menus for those children, again, trying to minimize the effort for the parent. And then we structured the dead times around what the parent felt they could do. So if they could do some table work, like academic tasks, they willingly did that. And it would be like worksheets, things that the school sent, because the schools do send in work, chores, and depending on the age of the child, sometimes it would be like a fun activity if we had the materials or whatever sort of needed, or independent play. So depending on sort of what the age of the child was. And then it kind of started all over again. So they just continued to use the token economy access to reinforcement. And most parents have been really good. During the dead time, they only give brief periods. And then they have longer periods, often after sort of meals. When it came to the siblings, we asked the parents to put the siblings exactly on the same schedule. So if the siblings were younger, sort of 3 to 6, 7, we managed a token economy with them as well, but it may have been more kind of activity based. Do this, then, but it was still kind of very much set up as a kind of a token economy, but more the tokens were activities and completing the activity, and then access to reinforcement. And so more of an activity schedule, I should say. And it was for the siblings, it was still half hour. So an activity that could last half an hour, and then free time. If both parents were at home, they took it in turns. If it was both parents with one child, it was 2 hours on, 2 hours off. So they took it in shifts. Mm-hmm. If it was two parents with two very demanding children, they did one-on-one. And then sometimes we gave both kids reinforcement time at the same time, so that both parents could be free. So it was just a way of trying to jigsaw puzzle people's days and needs, to the point that everything was really, really structured, and parent knew what to do at any point of the day.
Mm-hmm. The tasks sound like they were all ones that parents either had to get done anyway or felt comfortable doing on their own with some amount of maybe some coaching ahead of time, or they'd already learned to do it.
So the other fundamental ingredient was the frequency of contact with tutors and consultants. Tutors see the families every day, and so this would be a senior tutor, so like a senior therapist, I guess, and you would say, and they see them about, the same time they would have seen them had they run a normal session. And then myself or the consultant, we see the parents and the staff online once or twice a week.
Okay.
And sometimes it's brief, but that frequent contact is fundamental. It's just crucial. And it's not like we have targets. We just watch the parent and coach them. If the children can do the sessions online, then it's just a normal session time. But it also means that they're the kinds of kids who the parents can manage without such a strict contingency.
Yeah. It sounds like that was a pretty small percentage of your overall students who could let's do a task and I'll just talk at you through the computer screen and you have your materials, or I'll hold up things, kind of.
We actually sort of use the desktop. So we share the desktop with the child and use that as if it was the table. So my students, your viewers won't be able to see it, but I can share a video with you if you want to see it.
That'd be great, yeah.
And while you're getting this set up, Francesca, how did you have the parents set up the token system? Like, what did you have them use as tokens?
Just a board, whatever the children were using before. It's generally chips. So what you call
the poker chip,
like the poker chip. Yeah, but not things that the children could just find around the house. So that's quite unique. But most kids were already on a token system. So actually, it was the parent who had to learn to manage it. The kids knew exactly what those tokens meant. But it was like, hold on a minute, I only have these, during session times or at school. I don't have these all the time.
Right.
So we have a little bit of resistance from the children. And, we coached the parents on the very first session. So we were there for a long time initially. And then just saying, look, if he doesn't want to do it, just wait. And as long as you don't give him that reinforcer. And it was something very simple. So, as they started earning tokens, it was actually very easy to switch to a closed economy. It wasn't, I wouldn't say it was very easy, but it wasn't as difficult as I was imagining, and having, we didn't really have to run any particular sort of consequence manipulation strategy. It was, so this is a child, he's 7 and it's in Italian, but this is how we do it. So we use the
14.
So he's working on a variable, so he spins the wheel, whatever comes up.
Oh, cool.
So the tutor is manipulating her desktop. And she's going to, I think she's just talking to him here. Same, put your hands down.
Cosa c'è dopo 16?
So what comes after 16? It's a before and after program. 17.
Per tutto.
Give yourself a token. So he gives himself a token.
Okay. He has a little whiteboard where he crosses off the numbers.
Yeah. She's asking, have you put it on?
Tutto, Vanni.
Show me.
Ok.
So he shows.
E dopo 2.
What comes after 2?
3.
3.
Benissimo, punto.
So give yourself a token. And so he does. That's how, this is a reading task. So we write. And that's his sister in the back doing her work.
Right.
They're on the same schedule, these two. Work time, free time.
Yeah. So if you just have the materials on your own computer, then you can share the screen.
Yeah.
And then for them, it looks like it's on their computer.
Yeah. So we don't hold cards up. We will do something like this. So this is an autoclative frame program where the child is just tacting, and these are the items he's tacting. So they all set up their own folder with all their materials, and the way it was simple to explain, as in it was just imagine that your desktop is your table.
That was the
Perfect.
instruction to the staff or to the
To the
students?
staff.
Okay.
To the staff.
That's such an elegant solution. It doesn't even dawn on me that you can just use the computer like a table these days, which makes me feel very old and out of date.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we want to be able to have the same stimuli to interact with the child. So, the desktop is like a table, is your tabletop. Yeah. And we deliver reinforcement through that too. So kids who like videos, we then go on YouTube and we say, okay, pick the one that you want. And then the interesting thing is that children have to tact exactly what they want, or they have to specify further. They have to tap very clearly what they're seeing and then specify, what their reinforcer is. So they can't just go, I want that. They have to say, I want the video with the green dinosaur shooting fire. Whereas normally they could just go, I want that, because we can't see what they're pointing at. So very quickly they learn to just further specify their reinforcer. So it's been positive overall. The parents report, they're very stressed, don't get me wrong, but they report sort of feeling that they've never been able to engage with their child in this way before. They have a level of sort of educational control that I've never been able to generate before. And they are now setting their own targets. They're not so dependent on my coaching or my colleagues' coaching as much. How long they'll be able to keep this up for, I don't know. It's not a natural situation for anyone. And, I am sort of the second week, we were all very enthusiastic. It was all very positive. By week 3, I'm seeing, sort of unusual behaviors, kind of obsessions with cleaning from my parents, kind of, needing to cook copious amounts of food. You start seeing these sort of completely different repertoire behaviors on people who are, completely healthy, don't have mental health issues, but, not being able to go out is such a fundamental need, which we've always taken for granted.
Yeah.
And it just makes you realize how, when you're in this situation, all those material things don't matter. And what you need is company, social interaction, fresh air, and access to food.
Well, I think, hearing all the systems and the coaching and getting the parents at least feeling like they can, at least for the short term, handle things at home. I mean, just so many great, elegant, sometimes simple, sometimes complex solutions. I mean, kind of reflecting on the process so far, I know we still got some ways to go, depending on where you are in the world, but were there sort of I don't know if positives is the right word, but sort of looking on the bright side of a really tough situation. So things that you felt you either learned as a practitioner, a clinician, that you say, hey, why didn't I think of that before? Or I want to add something like this with new clients when this all passes, hopefully not too far in the future. Any kind of good lessons that you would say you took from all this so far?
I think is, sometimes kind of saying, well, it can be done. You can't get parents engaged that much, or it's easier for them to give the iPad, and kind of complaining about how difficult sometimes it was to get parents involved and to buy into the procedures that we were using. And I felt sometimes our procedures were just too complicated. Mm-hmm. We were just expecting too much. And once I scaled it down and gave parents a system to actually have instructional control, very tangible, made it very simple, then controlling the reinforcers wasn't so hard. So I guess when all this ends, I'm absolutely in awe of all my parents for just having trusted us to support them at a really difficult time when they could have said, I can't do it. And that's what I was expecting. I was expecting, it's too much. You're asking too much. And to be honest, none of my parents did. They said, we need to survive here. And we know that we can't do what we used to do. And so we'll do what's necessary. And once I had that motivation, then I had to make sure I didn't lose that. Mm-hmm. Even it's really hard. And it's really sort of make it simple, make it real, embed it in the daily activities, which of course we know from the sort of early start Denver model kind of approaches, the more kind of developmentally oriented approaches, embedding motivation in it's easier said than done. And that's the truth. It's one of the most difficult things for us as practitioners and parents is to involve a child in day-to-day activities, manipulating that motivation. It's so much easier to get that piece of chocolate out and get the child to ask for it. Mm-hmm. So much easier to use tangible, artificial, non-functional reinforcers. And so that's how we switched it is through routines. And in this case, instead of being social play routines, which is what we would do with the very young children, these were household chores routines. And that's a lesson I take home, is maybe do more of that once all this, and trust that parents do want to do the best for their children, and try to understand what are the variables that are maintaining their escape behavior. In this situation, they can't escape it. It's a forced choice. They can't. They can't go out. They're forced to. But it's how can I achieve the same without aversive control? That's the lesson I take home.
Well, Francesca, thank you so much for taking the time out. It's stressful times, and it was really, I feel very inspired. I think just hearing all of the steps you took. I know I work with a lot of practitioners where the question, I think especially here as in everywhere, is what are we doing to support families, and what's school going to look like for the next 2-3 weeks, a month, the rest of the school year for some of our learners with the highest level of need. You're right. It's not going to just be like, well, let's just try to remake what we did when they could go to school at home. That is going to get no buy-in from parents, no buy-in from students, no buy-in from teachers. So what else are we going to do? And sort of listening to you talk about your process and those steps. I know I have a lot of really exciting ideas. I'm going to go email some folks right after we're done talking.
Well, share them with us so that we can maybe sort of, reciprocate and just mutually learn.
Will do.
Oh, yes.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you very much. You and your family stay safe in these interesting times, I guess we could say.
It's the biggest event we will ever live in our lifetime, hopefully.
Yes.
But maybe we can all learn from it.
We want to say one more time, just a very big thank you to Dr. Espinosa for taking the time out of her day, out of her work, out of her, time with family, which we all we all have a lot of need to be spending time with our family members during these tricky times. So thank you so much, Dr. Espinosa, for speaking with us about this very interesting topic. I know I was very kind of galvanized to take what just felt like a problem with insurmountable barriers and to just step back and say, wait a minute, here are some great ideas. Maybe there are more things to add to, and maybe there are other ideas that we can all kind of combine as a field and come up with, continued solutions. I think some of these, at least for the clients, Dr. Espinosa's clients, have worked really well. I think a lot of those are going to translate to here in America, possibly other parts of the country. But certainly, please keep abreast of any changes. If you haven't joined any of the professional BCBA groups on Facebook, whether it's ours, whether it's other companies, whether it's other pages, please share any thoughts you have. This is definitely a problem that is not going to get better quickly. And the more good solutions that we have, the more discussion we have as professionals, I think the better we can make this time for individuals who are in real need of support from as many other as possible. Before we wrap up, I want to give you that second secret code word. It is table. 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 Now, I always thought of a table as a hard piece of wood that you would put things like your dinner or your flashcards on, but you could actually think of your desktop as a table. If you listen to that episode, that blew my mind. I wish I could say I totally had thought of that before, but it was like, I felt like the apes in 2001, it's like, whoa, I could use the items around me as tools. I was really impressed by that. Many of you probably said, yep, that makes sense to me, but I was blown away. Table. And with that, we come to the end of our episode. So this is an extra episode coming out on a Friday. We hope everyone is listening to it from a safe place. If you're looking for more podcasts, more ways to learn more about behavior analysis, well, why not subscribe to ABA Inside Track? We're on Apple Podcasts. We're on Spotify. We're on Stitcher, just pretty much anywhere you get your podcast. Like I said before, please feel free to reach out and join our online communities. We have Facebook, we have Twitter, we have Instagram. We have these posted on YouTube as well in audio format with subtitles. You can always go to the website, abainsidetrack.com, to find links to the articles if you want to listen to the podcast there. We also have a new section that is titled Free CEUs. So these are podcasts that have free CEUs associated with them. So this episode is an example of that. Other episodes we've done in the past include supporting students with autism going to college, working with parents to decrease stress, which might be a relevant topic right now. We also have an episode on the ethics of using telehealth. Again, seemed some of those rules were more stringent at the time we recorded it. Some of them have been relaxed a little bit given our current situation. I still think it's probably important to be mindful of some of the
Yes.
pros and cons of using telehealth, especially if it's a new service that you've just started using, maybe in your company or in your practice. And then, of course, this episode, those will all be available for free learning credits. Again, you have to listen to us, though. So if you said, I don't want to listen to these folks anymore, sorry, we can't help you there. Big thanks to Dr. Espinosa. Thank you, Diana, for being here.
You're welcome.
Thanks to Jackie, our other co-host, who is not able to be here. We also want to say thank you to Dr. Jim Carr for recording our intro and outro music, Kyle Sturry for our interstitial music, and to Dan Thabit of the Podcast Doctors for editing this quicker. We asked him to do it as quickly as possible, and he did it even faster than we thought. So thank you, Dan. And then also to Hollis Irvin of the Sycamore Workshop for our visual design. We'll be back not even in a week with another full-length episode. But until then, keep responding. Bye.
Bye.